Aloha, I'm Dr. Kioni Dudley. Over the next hour, we hope to educate you about hurricanes and about the new risk that Hawaii now has of being hit by a hurricane. We will tell you about all the massive problems that hurricanes will cause. We will tell you that 187,000 houses will suffer major damage or be destroyed. And we will tell you that when our people begin looking for shelters, there aren't many. And if the hurricane is higher than a Category 1, we don't have any shelters at all. In a Category 2, 3, 4, or 5, there is no place to find safety. Many thousands will die in their homes. We'll talk about what needs to be done, and we'll give you some ideas about how to protect yourself and your family. And as we will tell you again and again, though, basically, you are on your own. I hope this program scares you into action. You will probably want to see the program again. It can be found on the Olelo website and also on YouTube. At those sites, you can also find it divided into 6 10-minute segments. To begin our program, let's learn a little about hurricanes. First, how large is a hurricane? Usually they are 300 to 600 miles across, but they can be bigger. This is Hurricane Lane, the Category 5 hurricane that was headed at us in 2018. You also see the Hawaiian Islands there. It's about 1,500 miles from one end of the islands to the other. But this hurricane is big enough to completely cover over all the islands at once. Let's take note that hurricanes spin counterclockwise. So, see how this is spinning? The fact that it spins counterclockwise is going to be important to know and keep in mind. Then notice that every hurricane has an eye at its center. And that eye is open all the way down and into the sea. And the eye has a wall around it. It's called the eye wall. And this wall circulates at the highest speed in the hurricane. Notice the wind speeds in the hurricane. Out here in the blue, the winds are 20 miles per hour. The lighter blue band is moving at 30 miles an hour. As we get closer and closer to the eye, the speed of the winds is increasing. The blue-green is moving at 40 miles per hour. When we get to the green, we're at 50, then 60, 70, 80, 90. So as the eye of the hurricane moves toward you, you experience stronger and stronger winds, which are tearing everything apart. How strong are the winds in the eye wall around the eye? In a Category 1, they are between 74 and 95 miles an hour. Look at the Category 3. They are 111 to 129 miles per hour. When you get to Category 5, they are close to 160 miles per hour. As the hurricane passes over you, you go through those stronger and stronger winds until the eye reaches you. Then all of a sudden, you are inside of the wall, inside of the eye, and it is very calm. All around you is destruction. Look at the trees with no leaves or branches. Notice the palm branch over the roof. There is no breeze. Nothing is moving. Then notice the eye wall. The only way for you to get out of this eye is for the hurricane to hit you with the backside of the eye wall, and you are going to go through all that unbelievable wind again. Let's look at the eye a little more. How wide is the eye? The smallest hurricane eyes are 20 miles wide, and they go up to as much as 40 miles wide. Oahu is 40 miles wide. If a hurricane with a 40-mile wide eye hits Oahu, Everybody on the island will experience its fiercest winds and rains. Twice, reaching the eye and leaving the eye. Okay, let's leave this now and talk of other things about the hurricane. Let's note the red arrow showing where the hurricane is headed. We are going to call that the front of the hurricane. Now notice again that the winds are going counterclockwise. But do you see how, as the winds approach the front, on the right side of the eye, they get stronger and stronger? Notice, at the bottom of the hurricane there, the winds are 90, but as they move around towards the front, they get to 100. Then cross the front and look as they begin to go back to the other side. They're down to 80. That's going to be important. Why? Because when the hurricane hits land, those winds on the right side of the eye will bring with them not only the strongest winds, but also a tremendous amount of piled up ocean water called storm surge. The water in the storm surge can be 3 feet to nearly 30 feet high on top of the land. Remember now, the winds pushing the storm surge are moving counterclockwise and are on the right side of the eye, so the storm surge is only going to hit the area to the right of the eye. But the storm surge can be 50 miles wide. So say a hurricane runs up along the Waianae coast, and the eye doesn't even touch Oahu. The whole southern shore of Oahu still could be hit by storm surge because the storm surge can be 50 miles wide. Storm surge is a real threat here in Hawaii. It's important to know that you can find maps on the internet that show areas susceptible to storm surge. Finally, let's look at what happens to a hurricane when it hits land. This is Hurricane Idalia, hitting land in Florida in August of 2023. Notice that the eye is still a good bit offshore. Now, as it comes onshore, notice that the land is breaking it up. When the hurricane is at sea, it sucks up warm water from the ocean. That water gives it energy. When it hits land, the fresh water is no longer available. And without that fresh water at the bottom, it slowly falls apart and can't make the full circle. As the hurricane moves inland, it dissipates and finally disappears. Now we've talked about the winds and the storm surge that a hurricane will bring. We need to mention that hurricanes sometimes bring tornadoes with them. The last thing I want to talk about is the rain. This is another huge thing to fear because of our mountains and the water that will come off of them. Hurricanes usually bring between 6 inches and 1 foot of rain. But if the hurricane stalls, it can bring much more. Hurricanes have been known to bring up to 5 feet of rain, and we aren't prepared for it. And it will kill so many. What happens to the water when a huge mountain gets pummeled with hurricane rains at every level? The water rushes down everywhere. What happens to roadways? What happens to the towns below? This water coming off the hill covers half of the first stories of these buildings in town. Will they survive? We live on islands with high mountains. How can we find out about flooding of homes on hillsides and beneath hillsides during heavy hurricane rainfall? In too many cases, we can't find out. The rainfall maps that have been made don't include hurricane rain. See that street coming straight down in the middle of that hill? That's Wilhelmina Rise in Kaimuki. How much water will be coming down that street? Where will it go? The FEMA studies say that it will be minimal, but that's in regular storms. Is there any possibility in the world that in a hurricane, water coming down that street will be minimal? It's time for emergency management departments in our government to really get to work mapping hurricane flood areas and then telling the people where to find those maps. It's time for our Congress and legislature and county councils to get the agencies the money to get the job done. It's time for us to vote for people who will get the needed money to those departments. We need to know what to expect in a hurricane. Let's move on now to meet John Bravender.
My name is John Bravender. I'm the warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service Central Pacific Hurricane Center. We're located in Honolulu on the University of Hawaii's Manoa campus. This solid black line is 140 degrees west longitude. This is the cutoff between the East Pacific and the Central Pacific. For any tropical cyclones east of 140, the National Hurricane Center in Miami is responsible for all forecasts and warnings. Between 140 west and the International Date Line, my office, the Central Pacific Hurricane Center, is responsible. A quick note about terminology. I'll try to use tropical cyclones as a generic term that includes all intensities: depression, named storm, hurricane. Each is defined by how strong the winds are, and tropical cyclone covers all of them. We'll take a look at tropical cyclone threats to Hawaii. First, let's get an idea of where tropical cyclones have been located in the past. For reference, here we are outlined in the black oval. You can see portions of the mainland on the right side of the screen showing this image covers a large chunk of the East Pacific, east of the date line. Now, there's a lot of lines on this map. Each one is a tropical cyclone track that occurred between 1970 and 2016. They're color-coded by the strength of their wind speed, with green being tropical depressions with winds less than 39 miles an hour, yellow being tropical storms with winds 39 to 73 miles an hour, red, hurricanes with winds 74 miles an hour or greater, and purple, major hurricanes with winds 110 miles an hour or greater. Now, a couple of things to notice. There's a lot more activity in the East Pacific than in the Central Pacific. Waters are a lot warmer, and there's a lot more low-level spin in the far East Pacific, which are two of the ingredients needed for tropical cyclones to form. Second, in the Central Pacific, most of the activity is located either east of Hawaii or south of us. There's typically a lot of wind shear near the state, which is changing wind with height, northeast trades at the surface, and southwest winds high in the atmosphere. There's also usually cooler water and drier mid-level air near us, all of which cause tropical cyclones to weaken. Waters are warmer, and there's less wind shear south of us, which is where you see the tracks moving east to west. Now, sometimes the weather pattern of the day causes a hurricane to recurve, like it did with the Niki in 1992. But it looks like most of the activity stays south, right? Next, let's see how that's been changing. The study referenced here looked at 3 decades of tropical cyclone tracks, from 1982 to 2012. As the ocean got warmer, they found that the track shifted towards the poles, north in the northern hemisphere. It makes sense, right? Hurricanes get their energy from warm water, and a warmer ocean means they can maintain their strength farther north. Unfortunately, that puts Hawaii increasingly in the crosshairs of those east-west moving hurricanes, not needing ingredients to come together to cause them to recurve northward. Looking into the future, this study was based on computer modeling through the end of the century. In their simulations, they found less wind shear and more moisture near Hawaii, two of the ingredients that have traditionally caused tropical cyclones to weaken near us. Also, they found the development area in the East Pacific shifted northward, which would also cause more of those west-moving tropical cyclones to approach us. What I want you to take away from this is that we don't have to wait until the end of the century before we start worrying about hurricanes. They're a threat now. So far, we've been lucky. Eventually, that luck will run out. So take the preparedness information we'll talk about here to heart. Remember, it's not a question of if, but of when. Thank you.
That was John Bravender, the warning coordination meteorologist at the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. So, with warming seas, the hurricane spawning area over by Mexico is moving farther north. And now hurricanes crossing the Pacific that used to travel a few hundred miles below Hawaii will be coming directly at us. And the cooler seas around us that used to slow them down are now warming around Hawaii too. John also described wind shear, which traditionally has torn hurricanes apart before they reach us. He talked about the trade winds at a lower level and the higher Kona winds going in the opposite direction. Together, they shear the hurricane winds as they approach. What he didn't mention is that we are losing those lower trade winds. Every year we are losing 2 days of trade winds, the winds coming down from the northeast. In 1970, we had trade winds on about 300 days a year. Now we have trade winds less than 200 days a year. That's a loss of 100 days of trade winds in 50 years. In 5 more years, we will have trade winds on less than half the days of the year. If a hurricane approaches on the days we have no trade winds blowing, there will be no two-way winds to shear it apart. It can make a direct hit. In 2020, the eye of Hurricane Douglas passed just north of Oahu on a path that used to be impossible because of wind shear. How did it get through? It came on a day with no trade winds. It's only a matter of time before the first direct hit. Next, we are going to talk with Hiro Toya, who is the director of the Honolulu Department of Emergency Management. How many people will be seeking hurricane shelters?
We don't know until an event happens, for a specific event, how many people will actually seek shelter. But a behavioral study that was done back in 2018 showed that about 20% of the public may seek a public shelter during a hurricane event.
And how many hurricane shelters do we have now?
So if we use the term hurricane shelter, we're really referring to the best available refuge areas, the best of what we have in our inventory. So with that out of the way, we have 38 facilities that we've identified as potential hurricane refuge areas. And so the capacity for that on the basis of 10 square feet per person, which is really not much room at all, right? We have approximately enough space for 100,000 individuals. So clearly there is a delta there. You know, if we can get as many as 200,000 evacuees, and if we only have space for 100,000, that's a problem. So that is something that we're continuing to address, identifying additional facilities, but also trying to do what we can to lower that number. You know, instead of 200,000, could it be a lower number by encouraging folks to do more home retrofits, for instance, so that they can better shelter at home, or identifying other alternatives instead of the publicly operated hurricane refuge areas.
Tell me the best available refuge areas. What kind of hurricane can they withstand?
The state actually has criteria and definitions for hurricanes that was defined back in the early 2000s. And unfortunately, most of our facilities don't meet that criteria. And that's why we have to shift to this methodology of finding the best that we have out of what we have, right? There are vulnerabilities associated with these buildings, but what we are hoping to accomplish is to identify facilities that folks can go to, those folks that live in the most vulnerable areas or in the most vulnerable homes. So for instance, if you live in a single wall construction home, chances are our best available refuge areas and would perform better than those types of buildings. If folks are able to find alternatives, you know, whether it's a friend's house or a neighbor's house or, you know, family member's house somewhere out of the water impact areas, we encourage them to find somewhere else they can go to. And if those are newer homes that are potentially retrofitted or, you know, have added additional protection, those may serve as better alternatives. But ultimately, you know, for folks, it's really important to prepare and plan now instead of when the storm is coming at you.
Let's come back to talking more about shelters specifically. When you get to the shelter, what would a person expect?
Our shelters or refuge areas are going to be pretty basic in terms of what's offered, and that's a protection from the elements. That's the primary thing that we can offer. Most of these facilities will not have supplies, so evacuees will have to bring their own supplies. And we really encourage folks to bring as much as they can. I know that water is going to be a big challenge to bring, but we encourage folks to bring 14 days worth of supplies, or as much as you can bring, right? So really thinking about what you're going to need, the bare necessities, whether it's food, medication, change of clothing, just something to help you stay somewhat hygienic. It is going to be a very austere environment.
Okay, that was Hiro Toya, the head of the City Department of Emergency Management. So, looking at the overall picture, we have 187,000 wooden houses on Oahu. A great many of them are single-wall construction. Most are expected to suffer damage, and many to be destroyed even in a Category 1. Most are not safe to stay in, especially those that are single-wall construction. Because of these unsafe houses, 200,000 people on Oahu will need shelters in a Category 1 hurricane. But we have only 38 shelters ready to receive people, and those 38 shelters can only accommodate 100,000 people, just half of those needing shelters. But that's not the worst of it. Most of those 38 shelters can withstand only a Category 1, and some can't even do that. So if we are hit by a Category 2, 3, 4, or 5, there are no shelters for any of us at all. No place to go at all. As we are saying again and again, you truly are on your own. Next, I want you to get to know Anthony Alto and Mike Henchy. Together, they created Green Island Films. A couple of years ago, they produced a 2-hour documentary titled Ketchup and M&Ms. That program, shown over and over on TV, was simply stunning. It was the beginning of awareness of our hurricane problem. The next segment of this program has been lifted from Ketchup and M&Ms. In it, you will meet Chad Buck, David Lopez, Albie Miles, and Governor Green, who at that time was Lieutenant Governor.
My name is Chad Buck, and I'm the owner of Hawaii Food Service Alliance. We're the state's largest supplier of highly perishable products to the grocers, clubs, retailers across all islands. We're in every grocer, every club, every retailer, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have operations on all major islands, and our full-time job, 365 days a year, is keeping Hawaii fed. Hawaii imports about 95% of all that we eat here comes from the mainland. We're watching the hurricanes come across the Pacific, and so everybody's kind of dialing in a little bit. And then 2 days out, things go crazy. The stores get wiped out of product as everybody kind of goes into survival mode for a hurricane. One, we're the largest handler of fresh produce and vegetables and so on, air freight coming into the state. So we're bringing in millions and millions of pounds of cargo. And in order to get that product here, we ride on literally every airline that flies out of LAX to Hawaii every day. And so whether it's United, it's Delta, it's Aloha Cargo, Pac Air, Hawaiian Airlines, every one of those airlines carries our product to come into the state. If you take a look at the ocean side of that, we ship out of the Port of Seattle, the Port of Oakland, the Port of LA, and the Port of Long Beach every week on every sailing. That's coming in. If one of those is late by a day, almost always, we will have to fly between the islands and start handling our inventory via air because what's coming in twice a week is literally only to last until 3 to 4 days later when that next shipment comes in on the container lines. You can't participate in this industry without taking a look at what's going on and wonder, why on God's green earth is this not grown here? We have to, absolutely have to, start growing our own food and becoming sustainable on our own. As the most isolated geographic area on planet Earth, it makes absolutely no sense to not be sustainable.
So it's 2019. I've just finished a conversation with David Lopez at the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, and I invited David into a conversation at the Hawaii Agricultural Conference. And I thought it was critical to bring Chad Buck into this conversation as one of the largest food distributors in the state of Hawaii, and pair him with the emergency management agencies at the city, county, state, and federal level.
You know, there's some things that happen in your life where you can always point to them and say, that's the moment I changed, or that's the moment, that was the shift in my thinking. And that moment on that day at the convention center, as he showed an overview of Hurricane Lane, whose path was bigger than our entire chain, David Lopez said,
Hurricane Lane was of particular worry because it was parked off our south shore, and especially off of Oahu. Oahu contains on its south shore, within the same 10, 12 miles of coastline, major infrastructure that either directly or indirectly affects the whole state. The Port of Honolulu, Pearl Harbor, oil refinery, wastewater treatment plants, food storage, fuel storage, the offshore mooring points to pump the crude in so it can be refined. If Lane would have hit us at a Category 5, we're looking at storm surge anywhere from 8 to 20 feet and possibly even more. And every piece of infrastructure that I just named would be in that inundation zone. It would be affected. Probably on impact, we'd lose our power grid. 60% of our big electric plants are in inundation zones, and roughly about 7,000 miles of overhead power lines. No electricity then would mean we can't operate gantry cranes. We can't pump water up to the reservoir tanks for residential drinking. Even in high rises, we're not going to be able to pump water up for them either. Airport, easily we would have had inundation to the terminal, which meant for H&L, we would have lost all 4 runways. When we look at other importation, especially through our sea chain, food comes to mind right away because we import about 90% of all our food products. And when we lose the port, a storm like Hurricane Lane shuts down approximately 2 days before, roughly, the storm actually strikes for safety reasons. So we lose our importation, which means we're starting to consume our emergency supplies. You combine that too with there's runs on the market, and our food supply is rapidly being reduced above normal rates. Once that storm hits, that means probably about 2 days after the storm, our market is down well below 40% of its normal capacity, and we're drinking ketchup and eating M&Ms.
and I'm like, no frickin' way. That can't be true. This is the state head of HAIMA talking to a group at the convention center. It's like someone sucked the oxygen out of the room. Everything goes dead quiet.
Many people hadn't actually considered that it is possible for us to run out of food in the case of a severe natural disaster.
We don't have any emergency medical supplies stocked either. So there's no food, there's no water, there's no medical supplies.
That I found to be shocking, that the official state policy is, in essence, you are on your own. You and your family are on your own. You must have a 14-day supply of food and water in your house because we cannot guarantee that we can support you in the case of a natural disaster.
You could probably expect maybe 5 to 10% of the people in the state may have that kind of supply to get by for 2 weeks, but that means 90 to 95% don't. Sure, maybe everybody's good for 3, 4, 5 days, but after that it becomes enormously problematic. And we would see rioting, we would see desperate moves by people if we had that, that kind of threat to people's lives.
This facility is 8 feet above sea level. If I walk across the park and throw hard enough, I'll throw a rock in the ocean. That's how close we are. Every major distributor in Hawaii is along the coastline. Why? Because all our stuff comes from somewhere else. And so we're all near the ports because that's where our food comes from. We are broken and we don't know it because we're designed to be dependent on someone else, but not ourselves. You have distribution, you have the food, you have cold storage, you have power generation, and it's all up and down the coastline. The obvious concern is with a tsunami and a surge of a hurricane, that supply chain stops. That supply chain gets destroyed. It's one of the first things that gets destroyed. If the cranes go down on the port, Pearl, I believe, has one crane. You can't feed Hawaii on that. You can't feed this island on that. This is just absolute dereliction of duty if you're a leader in this state.
It was shocking to hear how quickly we'd be in a desperate state. A lot of people think, oh, okay, we'd be okay for a couple months. No, we'd be only okay for a couple days. Hopefully we will never have that Category 5 storm that not just comes through here, but also lands and hits and takes us out from an infrastructure standpoint. Hopefully it'll miss enough, but that's not a plan, that's not a policy.
And so what was beginning to take shape is we are all beginning to see we are in deep, deep trouble. And unless we take a collective action, we are literally racing towards disaster. And everyone from the top down has been asleep at the wheel.
To that point, Chad is completely correct.
There's no way on God's green earth that the state of Hawaii, any government agency, including federal, can take care of our people after a major natural disaster.
So if you put these two things together, that we do not store much emergency or commercial food in the state, that we don't have the emergency management agencies articulated with the private sector food distribution networks, and we don't have many families that are storing that 14-day supply of food, in the case of a natural disaster, many families will go hungry.
I really want to again thank Anthony Alto and Mike Hinchy and Green Island Films for letting us use this segment of the copyrighted Ketchup and M&Ms. If you want to watch this again, it can be found on the Olelo website and on YouTube. So the hurricane is over. You come outside the house hoping to find help, but looking around, you realize that there is no hope of help, nor will there be for weeks to come. You are lucky to be alive yourself. Look at this house, and this, and this. So many houses completely gone, and so many who lived there are gone too. Whole families erased from the earth. Or maybe yours is a different situation. Maybe you live in a high-rise. Perhaps you barricaded your family in the bathroom while many of your fellow occupants were sucked out, carried in the wind, and died. No room was spared here. You also come downstairs and look up your street. And you also slowly realize that there will be no help for weeks. No food, no water, no working toilet, no medical help, no running elevator to get you back upstairs. But at least you have 14 days of food and water upstairs, right? Or maybe you won't even be that lucky. In our first hurricanes, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, will die. And you may be among the thousands who die. In this time now, before the first of many hurricanes strikes, each one of us needs to prepare for our lives to possibly be cut short. There are important things one needs to do, like taking photos of one's will and of one's life insurance, car insurance, home insurance, and getting them into cloud storage using one's computer or cell phone, and then letting heirs know where to find them. And there are also more profound things to do, like truly coming to grips with the end of your life. We all need to be prepared to die. You know, different as the many, many religions of the world are, the one thing that most share is belief in the afterlife, belief in the spirit world. Why? What have their followers experienced for thousands of years that makes so many of them believe that the soul lives on? As you prepare for your life possibly cut short by a hurricane, should you not look into the afterlife more too? You may find a whole world of love and blessings. We have talked about some extremely negative things and scary things. Let's now look at more positive things, things you can do to help yourself and to save your family. We will begin with our next expert, Dennis Huang. Dennis is a lawyer and also a faculty member in the Sea Grant program at the University of Hawaiʻi, Manoa. He has developed the Homeowner's Handbook to prepare for natural hazards. Throughout his presentation, he will be showing pictures from the book. And when he finishes, many of you are going to want to get a copy. If you just type the title in your computer's search engine, the whole book will come right up. It can be downloaded free of charge. Welcome, Professor Dennis Huang.
Why is this house no damage, okay? So it was built in 2017, 3 months before Harvey hit, under modern building codes. So it has a continuous load path connection, has a strong roof and window protection. All of these things can be added to existing houses. So here's what a continuous load path connection is. It's essentially tying the roof to the wall and the wall to the foundation. Every intersection has a connection. Here's the roof to the wall. The weakest part is is right here. So that's why the hurricane clip, that's this part A. And then the stud is tied to the double top plate with this strap. The second level is tied to the first level with this other strap. The stud is tied to the base plate with this other strap. And then the base plate, the sill plate, they call that the base plate, is anchored to the foundation with this anchor bolt. Okay? So that's a continuous load path connection. So houses built after 95 on Oahu have that continuous load path connection. Okay? But if you don't have it, you could try and add it as a retrofit. And as a retrofit, a lot of the connectors are done externally. So like this example here, okay, here's the hurricane clip, tying the beam to the column and the column to the foundation. Okay, that's a continuous load path. So here's one of the reasons why you want to tie the roof to the wall, the hurricane clip. Almost every single wall house in the state can be retrofitted with this hurricane clip. This is the HPT clip made by Simpson Strong Tie, and it ties the roof rafter to the wall. It was designed a lot in the past. This freeze board used to stick out, so you couldn't use the traditional H3 clip, but with this HPT clip, it wraps around the freeze board, allows you to tie the roof rafter to the wall. So in the Homeowner's Handbook, there's a step-by-step guide on how to put in the HPT clip. If you're not handy, hire a contractor. It's under $2,000. For most small houses, it'll be around $1,500. And if you get some insurance discounts, you could have a payback of like 7 years or 8 years because they'll give you a discount for putting the clips in. It's a good investment. It strengthens your house. It adds value to your house. And this is what you're trying to prevent, okay? So almost every house in the state could be retrofitted relatively easy with these hurricane clips. You could either use the H3 if there's no freeze board sticking out, or the HPT. Some people use the HM9, which is stronger, and We think that since 2007, around 3,000 houses have been retrofitted. So generally, the weakest part of a house is the roof-to-wall connection, and that's why the hurricane clip is so important. In the book, there's a step-by-step guide on how to do this retrofit. Here's like adding knee brace stabilizers to the kickers, and attaching the hold downs, and then drilling the holes for the anchor bolts, and tying the hold downs to the scabbing and also the concrete post. Since this retrofit came into the book, there's like 2 or 3 houses that we have examples that they did this retrofit on Oahu. So now what you have here is a house that was built in 1956. Remember, they didn't require a load path until 1995, but now you have hurricane clips throughout the whole, all the trusses there, and then you have all these hold downs here. So it's a 1956 house with a continuous load path, and the insurance for this example went from $1,200 to $900 a year. Window protection. Here's a Niki, and you can see Kauai during the Niki, and you can see this wood pallet flying around. Very strong winds. You got to protect your windows. This is why you want to keep the envelope of the house intact. Here, the wind pressure is only on the outside, okay? But here, there's a breach in the envelope. That could be a broken window, for instance. Once the envelope gets breached, sometimes the roof will blow off. That's a common progressive failure sequence. 5/8" plywood is recommended. The 5/8" will still pass the large missile test. That's a 9-pound 2x4 going at 34 miles per hour. 5/8" plywood will pass that missile test. 1/2" plywood will not pass the missile test. If all your panels are prepared beforehand and stored neatly in the garage, you could put them up in 5 or 10 minutes for an incoming event. Here's what the storm panel screws look like. Okay, there's like, under normal conditions, like it's always in place, and it's either around the full perimeter for a full perimeter install, or just on the top left or right corner. Okay, and it's covered with this white cap. And then when there's an incoming event, you pull the cap off, and then you hang the panel, and you fasten it with the wing nuts. We're going to go over other window protection systems. Okay, so here's what the National Weather Service has. Roll-down shutters. They're more expensive, but the advantage is you just throw a switch, and they deploy automatically. Fabric. Okay, so this is for large or unusually shaped windows. It's a hurricane fabric. It'll pass the missile test. Okay, your window may break, but it'll still hold the envelope. Here's a house protected with fabric. Accordion shutters. This is a house in Kaimuki, and it's always deployed. And to deploy it, you just swing each shutter, and it joins in the middle, and then you lock it. Another option, which is becoming popular, is these polycarbonate panels. They pass the missile test also, and they're lightweight and strong. And here's a polycarbonate panel protecting a window on a single wall house. It has storm panel screws are on the perimeter. That's how they're protecting their window. Impact resistant windows. This is a little more expensive. The impact resistant windows are always in place. They add value to your house. They'll protect your house for 50 years. Doors. Okay, garage doors are a potential weakness in a house. Here's a garage door that has vertical bracing. These braces, they take 5 to 10 minutes to put up for each one. It comes as a kit. For your front door, you should always have a door with 3 latches and one thing that's very protective you can consider is changing your screen door to a security screen door. You know, when you fortify your house, it's going to be hard for things to get in and hard for you to get out. So you always want to make sure you have 2 exit points in your house, and the security screen is a good way to get it.
Thank you so much, Dennis Huang. Again, you can find a copy of this book on your computer by just typing in the title. And again, it's free. I want to go on talking about positive things that you can do. I also want you to be aware of safe rooms. You can build your own safe room outside. There are pictures and instructions on the internet. Or you can buy a safe room on the internet. The thing to remember is that while people shelter from tornadoes for only an hour or two, people shelter from hurricanes from 10 to 12 hours, or if it stalls, possibly multiple days. And you need to be in that shelter the whole time. The shelter needs room for food and water, a toilet, and room for occupants to sleep. These 2 hurricane safe rooms are made by Texas storm shelters. They will withstand things hitting them at 250 miles an hour. Both of them are 6 feet by 8 feet. You can have it shipped to Hawaii and fully installed for about $19,000. One last thing that will help you. Is there any way to purchase 14 days of food for yourself and your family? Yes, on the internet. You'll find all kinds of food there that will last up to 25 years. Among them are MREs, developed by the military. MRE means meal ready to eat. But there are all kinds of food that you can find on the internet. These are some of them. You may store them in your pantry or in your garage. Okay, talking about meals ready to eat, this brings us back to Chad Buck. After Chad Buck finished his segment, he realized that while people might have 14 days of food in their closet, it was going to be perhaps a month before food would be brought in. So he got a shipping container and filled it with meals ready to eat and stored it in Waianae. Now clearly, we're going to need these kinds of containers all over the islands. And so I want to take this opportunity to invite the very rich among us to do the same thing that Chad Buck did. Fill a container with meals ready to eat and put it in a place where our people can get to it when we need it after a hurricane. You can even put your name on it. If you are interested in doing this, contact Hiro Toya at the City Department of Emergency Management. Okay, we are drawing to the end now. So let's ask, what do we need from our government? First, we need about 80 hurricane shelters that will withstand a Category 5 hurricane. Second, we need a law requiring that every new house and every new condominium building will be built to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. The whole house, not just a safe room. Third, we need a law that every new school and every new public building will be built to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. And fourth, we need to fortify the 187,000 houses that are predicted to be damaged or destroyed. Why do we need to build everything to withstand Category 5 hurricanes? Because they are coming. Lots of them. With warming seas, hurricanes are getting stronger and stronger. In the last 30 years, the number of Category 4 and 5 hurricanes almost doubled from the previous 30. In the late 1900s, the world only had 10 Category 4 and 5 a year. Now we have 18 a year, and that number will grow as the seas get warmer and warmer. And the largest increase in Category 4 and 5 hurricanes is projected to be in the North Pacific area. That's us, and Guam, and the Marianas and the Marshall Islands, and the Philippines, China, and Japan. The Northern Pacific will get the greatest number of these powerful hurricanes. And So far, I have not yet mentioned the super Category 5 hurricanes. These are the ones with winds 191 miles an hour. They cause massive destruction. These super Cat 5s are also increasing very fast. Right now, the world is getting one every 8 years. But by the end of this century, we will be getting at least one every year somewhere in the world, possibly here. If we want to save ourselves and future generations, we need to start now to build everything to withstand Category 5 hurricanes. We will need billions of dollars to get these jobs done. Where will we get all that money? We certainly need to pressure Congress, our legislature, and our county councils. And maybe it's time to mention the elephant in the room. The U.S. military could and should be the biggest source of help to us. In 1893, the U.S. military landed troops and overthrew our Hawaiian kingdom. In the 130 years since, they have occupied about 20% of our land and have never paid a cent in rent. The military has more than 250,000 troops and dependents in the islands. If they would provide Category 5 hurricane shelters for all of their 250,000 plus people, that would greatly lessen the number of shelters that the state needs to provide for civilians. If they would fortify the homes that their people live in, that would tremendously cut the number of homes that we must strengthen. Before we end, I just want to ask, you've heard all of this before, right? No? Do you know why this is the first time you are hearing of it? Because your government is hiding it from you. Almost everyone in government has been aware of it for a couple of years now. That's really true. Why are they hiding it? They think it's too big a problem to do anything about. But instead of tackling it head on and finding ways to save the lives of our people, they are keeping it secret. And they are doing nothing to protect you. In the 2024 legislative session that just ended, there were 2 hurricane bills before the Ways and Means Committee. One would have required all new public buildings and schools to be built to withstand Category 5 hurricanes. The other would have given you a tax break of $1,500 to strengthen your home enough to withstand hurricane winds. In spite of many people asking him to hear the bills, Senator Donovan de la Cruz refused to hear either one. The official stance of your government is, let's wait and pray and hope. Let the first hurricane kill thousands of people. The federal government will give us the money to bury them and clean up, just like they did in Lahaina. Then we'll see what we learn and see where we go from there. Isn't that nice? They're just going to let you die. Does that make you angry? Well, it's true. And unless you get mad and let them know you are mad, that's what's going to happen. We have an election coming up in a few months. If someone sends you campaign material and it doesn't list hurricane preparation among their top priorities, toss it and vote for somebody who will move on this. The governor needs to get behind this in order to make it move. Fortunately, Governor Green recently appointed Luke Myers to be his state disaster management advisor. Luke had been the head of HIEMA, the Hawaiʻi Emergency Management Agency. He wants to get us prepared for hurricanes. Tell the governor to empower Luke Myers and get him the help that he needs to do it. Everything that needs to be done can be done. All of our people can be saved. But you have to get active, and you need to start making demands. In closing, I want to thank the Makakilo Kapolei Honokai Hale Neighborhood Board for bringing together the experts that we have heard today. I want to thank Olelo Community Media for helping us to reshoot the entire program. I want to thank Kareen Makahilahila for her marvelous job in editing this with me. I want to thank the nonprofit 2050 Hawaii Incorporated for sponsoring the program. And I want to thank Tesla Solar for funding its creation. Finally, I dedicate this program to my wife, Doris Sadako Dudley. You may want to see this program again. It can be found on the Olelo website and on YouTube. Thank you very much for watching. Aloha.